Hello, everybody, and thanks for sticking around for this discussion, this Q&A for Fruits of Labor, which is playing as part of IFF Boston 2021. My name is Brian Tam. I'm the Executive Director here at IFF Boston. I'm so glad you could join us. So I'd like to bring out our couple special guests. First, I want to bring up the Director of Fruits of Labor, Emily Cohen Ibanez. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
And to moderate this, I'd like to bring Carrie Jung from WBUR. Hi, Carrie.
Hi. Good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining in.
Really looking forward to this conversation. So Carrie, I'm going to throw it over to you.
Great, thanks. Well, Emily, like I said earlier, I'm very excited to talk with you about this film, Fruits of Labor. The main character, Ashley, is just she's such an amazing woman at just 18 years old. And so I think one of my first questions is just, how did you meet her? How did you find her? And what about her made you think, I need to tell this story?
Yeah, well, hi, Carrie, and this is such a pleasure to be here. And, Ashley is a very special young woman. And I met her when she was 15. So I was doing arts development work. I was teaching a course at university, and had formed a video collective with my college students and with youth from working families where their parents did farm labor primarily, and also domestic labor as well. And Ashley was one of these young women, one of the youth in the group, and she had a special curiosity. She was shy, which is hard to believe now, but she was, and I really identified with that. I was very shy in my youth. And, a bright young woman. She cared about her community. She wanted things for her own well-being, but also for the well-being of her community, that I found really special, and was a part of fighting to establish a community garden, which you get to see glimpses of in the film. So yeah, and then I got to know her over the years. And then when Trump was elected in 2016, ICE raids had been going on for a very long time, but there was an uptick in this, and her and all the youth I was working with in this video collective in arts development, they were all going to work in the fields, replacing undocumented adults. There's a labor gap, and then doing, night shifts in the food processing plant. And so I thought, wow, this isn't a told story. So when I approached her about it, and I was really, I'd gotten to know her and her family, and she decided to embark on the adventure with me.
Wow. Yeah. And it was such an amazing story. Just, I think one of the things that stuck out to me watching the film was, does she sleep? I mean, I know you pictured her a couple of times, like not working, arguably relaxing, but yeah, I mean, how much of her day, her week, did she actually get to not, have to be an adult like she was at such a young age?
And that's the thing is, I do in the film, you get to see her as a teenager and, looking for her prom dress and having certain desires and doing those things. But yeah, I mean, she had a brutal work schedule. And that, so many young people, for Ashley, it was important to do the film because she knew that there was other youth in the food processing plant where she would do the night shift. There was other kids there with her as well. And yeah, she didn't really sleep. She'd get like an hour of sleep. And that really can be really traumatic for children. And it can affect, your education, as you see in the film, and your, depending on what you want to do in life. We all have different dreams, and should we have the opportunity to seek those, and it becomes very difficult because her work schedule was totally grueling.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I was just thinking, how do you find time to do homework? And I saw in one scene she was preparing for, like a public speech she was about to give. But, I know it was mentioned a couple of times, and you just mentioned it too. A lot of her other peers did work in the fields as well and had those grueling work schedules. So as an education reporter, I know a lot of times like educators will, keep in mind the backgrounds that kids are coming from, offer some grace in terms of like what else they're facing in their daily lives. How much did that factor into Ashley's education and some of her peers that were going through this? Was the education system pretty understanding, or was that a really challenging thing for them?
I think there's a lot of challenges. So while in the United States, it's legal, where it's one of the only industries is agriculture and also house cleaning, domestic labor, in which you could be as young as 12 years old and do a 40-hour work week. And that's legal in this country, and it's a vestige of slavery. And it was with the New Deal, in the 30s with FDR, those were carved out fields of profession that don't get the same workers' protection as other things. And that was partly to appease Southern Democrats at the time, and Jim Crow, and who did these kinds of jobs, right? So there's a whole reason why. Now, the children are not in this country allowed to do night shifts. Because of that, kids do not tell their teachers. So a lot of the teachers, they didn't, they felt, they were like, wow, I didn't know how many of my students were doing this or what was going on until the film. And so, and that's partly some of the goals of the film too, is, it's a lyrical story, it's poetics, and I want you to get to know this young woman and her world, and have a certain, follow her and her wonderment in nature and all these wonderful things that makes up Ashley. But also, there's sort of different audiences for it. And I think it's important that educators, I was an educator myself, and saying, oh, okay, these are the different obstacles our young people, and increasingly, I believe, our American youth are facing today, So there is, there's an understanding among the teachers, especially around picking season. So in the beginning months and then in the ending months of the school year, when strawberries are in full force, and then the summer. And so there's an awareness around that, and there being some issues there. But the night shift, largely kids don't, children don't tell their teachers because it's not legal. They're worried about that. They're worried for their parents, so it's a whole host of issues that stop children from getting that support. That said, the teachers at the high school where Ashley was at are really amazing, and really love the community. And, I find it's an excellent school. It's just so many of the students have these challenges.
Yeah, I saw that she did graduate. That was such a nice surprise there at the end, because it does, at one point in the film, she's saying, "I don't know if I'm going to graduate." So that was great to see. Did she? I know she was sort of waffling on what her goals were as far as career went. She was thinking about esthetician, maybe. Did she, after she got into the community college, did any of that kind of shore up for her, or is she just still exploring higher education at this point?
She's exploring higher education. She really took to her courses in psychology and Chicano studies. So that's something she discovered she liked. She thought she would just train to become a nurse, because she thought, oh, nurses make good money and I care about people, and this would be, that was a profession. But what she's discovered is she really loves Chicano studies and psychology. And I just encourage her, really, I think for young people, if you find something you like, that's going to help you finish your degree. And that's what really matters. Getting that degree opens doors. She also really loves film. So she's been working on some other films with me in terms of, I do shorts, commission shorts, and I sometimes employ her as a field producer where that makes sense. But I really want her to continue focusing on her studies, because I think that will open more doors for her and her different aspirations. So I don't think she's totally decided on a profession, but she certainly has affinities and likes, and really does want to get a 4-year degree.
Right. Okay. And you were mentioning earlier about how some of the teachers at her school, like their eyes were opened when they saw the film about how many students were doing overnight shifts and that kind of thing. So I guess it made me think, what were your goals as going into producing this film, coming up with the idea? What were you hoping to get across? What would you like the audience to come away with as far as the big picture goes?
Yeah, I think there's several things. So one of the things that motivated me was, after Trump's election, there was a depiction of the working class as sort of white angry men, and that had been disenfranchised or alienated in some way. And in my experience, I was like, well, a lot of the working class and rural working class are brown. And so I wanted to show a brown town that was largely working class town, and to show a different narrative around who are working families in America, who is the working class. So that was one of the aims. The other one is, the coming of age genre. It's this classic American genre of filmmaking, and yet I hadn't seen many women of color, especially working women, getting afforded that story. Oftentimes social issue films, it'll be about the issue and the person becomes a stand-in to bring awareness to an issue. But for me, what was important is I wanted people to get to know Ashley as a person, as a full person. And so doing that coming of age, it has these universal themes that I think so many people can relate to, whether she's worrying about her grades, or she's falling in love for the first time, or, the prom dress, and that there's some humor, that she's really a full young woman who's navigating and making decisions, and that she doesn't need to be this perfect stand-in, but you can come to love Ashley for all of who she is. And that she also, when you see someone working in the fields, you might not realize, wow, look at all this richness in her way of envisioning the world. And so for me, allowing for poetics, kind of, there's, what I would call sort of magical realism, embracing that tradition that largely got popularized in Latin American novels and fiction writing, and to open that space where, a young woman has a whole interior world. So that was really important. And then, of course, yeah, issues around labor. When we're now becoming more aware, perhaps with the pandemic, around essential labor. But, still, even with that awareness, people who are working in the fields, this work is treated as denigrated. There is nothing inherent in picking food that we all depend on to live. All of us eat every day. Why is it then that there's such a denigration of the work and dehumanizing of the people who do it? And so for me, there's also, let's reimagine work in this country. Let's reimagine the way our food industry works. Ashley, it is a small story in the sense that I'm really focusing on, very nuanced kind of family dynamics and this very personalized story. But to me, it's about the global food chain as well. And because Ashley's caught up in that. And so if you get to know Ashley, if you get to know all the nuances of her family, perhaps you might think, wow, look at all these things working against American families. Why don't we reimagine the way we think of work and value the people who are doing this essential work? So those are the many things. I could go on. Gender is a big one, and the family dynamics and women's work.
Yeah.
So
the role,
yeah,
the outsized role she played in her family compared to her brother, and he was only 2 years younger than her. That really struck me.
Yeah, and that's a common family dynamic. I don't think that is only in Latino or Mexican American families, but I think that can happen across many cultures in the US, where women are often burdened with more responsibility. And at a younger age, women are considered more responsible. And so take on the responsibility of childcare, taking on the responsibility of work. And that happens throughout our lives. Many of us can relate to not only having to work in whatever industry you work in, but then all the responsibilities generally are, even in the most progressive families. women are often shouldered that burden of the domestic labor. So for me, it was very important. I was very intentional about showing family, because for understanding women's position in the workplace, I believe you have to understand the intimacies and nuances of family life.
Right. I really appreciated, just like you were saying, how nuanced and how layered the film was. It wasn't just about one particular issue and the struggle with that. There were some really happy and light moments in the film. And that was really refreshing to see. So I appreciated that. But one thing I wanted to ask you is, I guess, had to do with storytelling and story arc, how you built the story. So there was that visual image of the turtle, the timid turtle going into its shell. And then, you go to the end and the butterfly, and she even speaks of that. And so I guess I'm wondering, like, was that in your mind first as far as like how the story might go? Or did that come out later because of something she said or that struck you? Where did that imagery and arc come from?
Well, so one of the things that everything everything that I tried out didn't necessarily work and make it into the edit, right? So one of the things I wanted, for me, the film process itself was as important as whatever the end product of the film. In some ways, maybe more so for me. And so I wanted to make what I like to call joyful filmmaking. And so what that allowed for is we did a lot of these theatrical sort of, what I call black box. We'd go in a black studio and try out things. We had the esthetician come into our black box, paint your nails. We did all the, some things that didn't come, but we did all these different ways that Ashley would address the camera or reflect on her life. I really wanted to create spaces of reflection and use the grant money I was able to raise to really create these artist retreats where we were just working together on the film, and creating spaces of reflection, of play, of experimentation, and that could happen alongside dealing with very difficult issues, right? And so you see those bits in the film, and some of those are, with the animals. I mean, Ashley, that conversation was very observational between her and Adrian, and where he decided she was a turtle. And then she described herself as this shy turtle. So that, and so then I don't know, I saw the image of the turtle. There's some people who were like, take that out. I found a little bit of humor in it. I loved it. And I'm like, that's the joy of being the director. Ashley wasn't opposed to it. And I'm like, so the animals make it in. But that also very much mirrors, Ashley's curiosity about nature. That comes from her in terms of the ancestors living in the berries, and some of the things of the butterflies. Ashley identifies as indigenous Chicana, and some of that imagery comes culturally, taking some of those kinds of images and following that arc of coming of age and her coming into her own power, and the symbolism around the ancestors. Oftentimes butterflies are representations of, the ancestors actually live in these butterflies. And so, those were some of the, those were choices, I guess. But the ones that I really enjoyed, and luckily my finishing editor, Andrea Scignoli, totally embraced it. Because I had all these different comments, and she said, let's go for it. I totally agree with you. Let's do it. Let's make it work. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that didn't make it in, but those things that did. And I think that for me, it really opened that space to allow for Ashley's introspection. And the film, the approach of the film, there are ideas in direct cinema, for example, in that being impartial or finding truth is this idea that you could be a fly on the wall. And that's great. And there's many films in that approach that I love. But for me, there's no way you can ever be a fly on the wall. You're always there with your camera. So why not just embrace it, collaborate with the folks that are in front of the lens? Some of the things are,
things that just sort of happen, but you're always sort of staging or setting certain things up at the moment that you say, okay, let's plan a shoot. What is happening in your week today? And whatever, and there's, the ways of constructing the scenes. Some of the things was like, oh, Beatriz, can you wear the same dress you were wearing? Let's shoot you looking out this way. So there was a total embrace of this being a film. That film is not reality itself, it's representation of reality. And there's always things that don't make it into a film. And there's choices and agency in the stories that we tell. And to me, you can reach a deeper truth with that. And that's why I worked so closely with Ashley, especially when we were doing the narration, and looking at the story.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's funny that you mentioned, you're always going to be there, noticeable. You do, as a viewer, you kind of get lost in that. You don't necessarily realize like there had to have been a camera there for a lot of these really intimate conversations. And so how do you think you got to that level of comfort with pretty much everyone involved, from her mom to her boyfriend, her brother's girlfriend? Everyone just kind of seemed so natural. So how did you get so close to them that they kind of ignored you and were so open?
I think that I had built that relationship years before I started filming. So I think that was really helpful. And also that, Ashley and her family had the bravery, the courage to open their lives, because I was very clear that I have no idea where this film will go, but my desire is that we will show this on a festival circuit, that we will get broadcast, to really share it as far and wide as we can. So, when we still discuss it, I just had my mom's name is Beatriz as well. So I just we had dinner, Ashley's mom and my mom and Ashley and I, and we all just were getting together and reflecting again. We're always talking about that. And for me, it's really important to check in, because sometimes if I feel often exposed or vulnerable, I want to make sure that through this whole process that I'm checking in to seeing how they're feeling. And I think I'm probably much more nervous person than they are. They seem to really be enjoying it so far. But I think it's something to always be thinking about, because, they really did let me into their life and trusted me. And Ashley always says, I don't know why, Emily, she says, I don't know. She goes, I just trust you. I decided to trust you, and I trust you, and I trusted. So that's a big responsibility as a filmmaker. So yeah, I think it's sort of a mutual thing. Partly it was the things maybe that I did as a director to develop those relationships and that confidence, but also the courage of whoever's in front of the lens to open, be open.
Great. Well, and then to wrap up, I have a question for you about the name of the film, Fruits of Labor. So obviously we're following Ashley through the film, but I can see several ways where, like fruits of hard work have come out of this. What were your intentions as far as who that reflects? Yeah, is it a little bit of everyone? Is it just Ashley? Where did you land there?
So I think there's several kind of meanings, right, that could be attributed to fruits of labor. It's almost like an idiom that we use in common speech. And of course, what the work is surrounding is strawberries, so there's a literal fruit and the labor that we often don't think about when we're eating strawberries. So that's the fruits of labor. But then also, in terms of, I think the dreams and aspirations and what people are able to harvest in the, in the sense of one's accomplishments or strivings towards certain dreams. And so I think that title just keeps bringing different meanings. We'll often joke about it and be like, well, look at, these are the fruits of our labor. We've been working really, really hard. And it's exciting that, you don't know, there's a lot filmmakers and the families or people who decide to be allowed to be filmed. there's a huge risk that it doesn't get the life that maybe you hope for. And this film, we've worked so hard, and it's getting a good life, and that feels like there's the fruits, we're harvesting the fruits of that labor.
Well, that's so great. Well, thank you again, Emily, for taking this time to talk about your film. Like I said, I really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot from watching it myself. I've never, I guess this just gave me new perspective when it comes to thinking about where my food comes from. So, all very important things.
Thank you so much. This was such a pleasure.
On behalf of the festival, I want to thank you both. Carrie, thank you for your insight. And Emily, thank you for sharing your film with us. And for both of you taking the time to talk to our audience. We truly appreciate it. And for everyone watching, thank you so much for watching, and take care.